The job before this, which I've had for 16 years, the two jobs, I worked for the same boss, but I had a very unique experience to watch about 225 retirees age over an 18-year period.
Wow.
And it was a classroom. More than anything, it was a classroom. I worked for an educational vacation company, but I learned. So I have quite a few different talks that I do, and I teach at NAILS, which is the New Adventures in Learning, and I use the classroom that I have worked within to share information that I have observed. So all of what I'm telling you, some of it is from working with different partners, lawyers and financial advisors and Banner Alzheimer's Institute and the Alzheimer's Association, and some of it is just what I've observed and what I have seen successful families do. As the community liaison for Visiting Angels, I do outreach and education, so I do these talks all over churches, wellness programs, workplace wellness programs, been to Intel and all kinds of different places, but I also care manage families. And so
What was yours to do what?
I care manage families. So the families that I care manage tend to be the families that don't have somebody close. Maybe they don't have children or a spouse at all, or their family lives thousands of miles away, and I work with their family members, their powers of attorney. Sometimes attorneys or fiduciaries or even trustees at a bank will function as people's powers of attorney. So I'm kind of that liaison to kind of bridge that gap of care. So I learn something new or 7 somethings new every single day, and I bring that experience to kind of share this information to you. So my goals today, I have 3 goals. If I can get you to think about something that you've not thought about before, if I can answer a question that was somewhere needling in the back of your mind, or, and this is my favorite, if I can get you to walk away from here and just do one action item from what you take away today, then I will feel like I have done my job. Am I at a comfortable volume for you to understand me? Maybe here, but understand, we're okay, all right. So I have a top 10 list of what I call getting your ducks in a row. And normally when you have a top 10 list, and I'm a big David Letterman fan, so this is where this came from. Usually you kind of tell people what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them, and then you review what you tell them. I'm not going to tell you until we go one by one, because I don't want you looking at that list and saying, oh, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, and I don't know what that is. I kind of want you focused with me, and then I will review it at the end, and I will actually give you a handout of those 10 things as kind of a reminder of things that maybe you need to go kind of check out. Okay, when we are in rough situations, what is the most human thing that we do? We kind of wish it would go away. You know, when it's really bad and we don't want to deal with it, before we kind of take that deep breath and decide we're going to tackle it, we just kind of wish we didn't have to deal with it at all. And that is normal. My friend calls that the humanism of being human. In our lives, we play many, many roles. We are men, women, brothers, sisters, daughters, grandma, grandpa, parents, spouse, friend, neighbor, employer, employee, all kinds of different roles. And in those roles, the reason we're successful in those relationships is because each of those roles have very defined boundaries. And we don't cross the lines of those boundaries. We stay within our boxes of what's appropriate and what's acceptable, and that makes our relationships successful. But when we are beginning to age and we are watching our loved ones beginning to age or get ill, we have to cross those boundaries. We have to go to that uncomfortable place and say things sometimes when we wouldn't normally do that. And that is kind of the first thing that I want you to get comfortable even thinking about. Because it may be that you're not going out of that comfort zone. Maybe it will be a point where your children have to come out of that comfort zone and say something uncomfortable to you, and are you ready to hear whatever that piece is? So, today we're going to look at how do we know when it's time to get some help. What can we recognize it? What kinds of things can we do to prepare for it? And then I'm going to share all kinds of solutions and resource pieces for you to be able to go home and get an action plan. When somebody is struggling, and maybe think in your life, maybe nobody in your immediate, anybody here have parents that are still alive? Okay. Spouse, anybody? Okay, well here, obvious, but, I put that out there because sometimes we have relationships even with neighbors that get different, but when somebody recognizes that they're beginning to struggle, that they're having some health issues, that there are some changes coming down the road, it's a whole lot easier to have a conversation with them. In my heart and soul, I believe from my 25 years of watching people age in front of my eyes, part of the reason why it really gets more difficult than it needs to sometimes is because we don't talk about some of those uncomfortable things. How we want it handled when, fill in the dot, when we can't drive anymore, when we're not safe to be at home anymore, whatever that piece is. We don't get a plan for ourselves, and we have to think about that. How do we want it handled when? Because until we're comfortable even talking about it with ourselves, it makes it infinitely more difficult to have that conversation with somebody else. So if somebody recognizes that they're struggling a little bit, it's a whole lot easier. Because when we look in the mirror in the morning, and if I asked you right now, close your eyes, and think of your really happy place, whatever that is for you. If it's on the golf course or the beach or, with your grandkids, whatever it is, eating chocolate mousse. In that really happy place, how old are you? How old do you feel? And if I ask you how old you feel in that, my guess is, however old you feel is younger than whatever your chronological age is. Because when we look in the mirror, we don't often see reality. We see that person who's 20 or 30 years younger, because that's how we feel in our head, even when our bodies betray us a little bit and they start creaking and moving around. So when you're having a conversation with somebody about something that's uncomfortable, we have to remember, they don't see themselves here. This is what they see. They don't see that they're struggling with difficulty sometimes. So you have to really make sure that that's in your head and you're acknowledging that when you're beginning to have a conversation. So one of the things I want to do is go through what are the signs to pay attention to. How do we know when it's time to get help and to make a change? What I say to you straight off the bat is change is the active word. You are looking for what things change. The reason they called hindsight foresight is because all of a sudden when we get hit in the head with whatever that change is, all those things that we were kind of ignoring or not acknowledging along the way, they come to us in this bright light saying, oh my gosh, they were so obvious. Why did it take something to hit me over the head to notice that change? Because oftentimes change is so gradual and so little bit, we don't see it. And then all of a sudden it's become the norm. And along the way it was so gradual we didn't see. Sometimes we need help just as a function of age because we aren't as quick as we used to be, we aren't as sharp as we used to be, we're not as agile as we used to be, we move a little bit slower. Sometimes it's that physical or mental decline in health, whatever that piece is. Post-surgery or procedure. These days, as of a year ago, January, Medicare has a new ruling that when you go into the hospital, they want the hospital to make you well. So if you go back into the hospital after you're discharged within the first 30 days, Medicare isn't going to pay the hospital in full for curing you because they didn't, or making you well enough to go home because they didn't. So they're paying attention to what happens. And if you have somebody with you for the first 3 days recovering after a surgery or a procedure that's difficult, your success rate for healing well increases by over 60%. So they want to know who's at home with you. And if you don't have somebody at home with you, they say, okay, you need to find somebody or you need to bring somebody in. In certain cases, you may be able to go to rehab, but only if you fulfill Medicare guidelines. So hospitals are paying attention to what happens. So you need to pay attention to what happens if you go into the hospital. So that you bring that help in. And it can be family, it can be friends, you can gather people, or you can hire in help. One of the services of non-medical home care, and there's about 400 agencies to choose from in Phoenix, is that they will provide that service anywhere from an hour to 24 hours a day. Desired functions aren't getting done. What's a desired function? something that's not really important, really, but let's say you go visit your neighbor and you're going to have coffee and it's 1 in the afternoon and your neighbor's still in her PJs. Is that bad? Probably not. Is it different from what you know to be normal for your neighbor? Probably. Maybe you go visit somebody once a week and, or maybe you go over every day and visit your neighbor. Or you have a spouse that's not wanting to take a shower anymore and they're wearing the same clothes 3 days in a row. You go to the neighbor 3 days in a row and they're wearing the same clothes and every day we have a new little soup stain or a toothpaste stain. Again, is that dangerous? Probably not yet. But again, is it different? So when we start noticing little differences, that's where we have to pay attention. And we have to start logging those, jogging them in our brain, or even writing it down. Because oftentimes what we do is we rationalize, oh, well, she's tired, I know her family was here this weekend, she's probably just tired this week, or whatever that. She hasn't been feeling well, it's probably why she's doing it. But we can't rationalize. We have to kind of pay attention, and even write it down if you think. If it's enough to make you think about it more than once, you need to pay attention, write it down. Basic functions aren't getting done. What's a basic function? Something that puts our safety at risk. So if somebody's not eating, they're not sleeping, they're not taking their medication, maybe they're showing some withdrawal in a very serious way that's very different from whom they normally are. Maybe they're not opening their mail and mail is just piling up. Those are safety issues because there are real serious consequences to that. So now those are action items, and those are those pieces where you have to open your mouth and say, hey, something's going on here. We gotta tackle this. Can I help you? Can I help you figure this out? Whoever that is. You know, maybe they have somebody, maybe you know the neighbor's daughters or whatever, and you point it out to them, but you don't want them to just be in that state all by themselves, because we're there to look out. Too many doctor's appointments. Now this even happens with spouses. You know, we go to the doctor once a year, twice a year, once a quarter. Now we're going to the doctor once a week. We've got 3, doctor appointments a week. That's normal. When we get to a certain age and we're struggling with a little bit of health issue here or there, that becomes normal. We live in a great community and lots of neighbors take neighbors to the doctors here. But we get calls from neighbors saying, I can't do it 3 times a week. I can barely keep up with my own life. And that happens with spouses too, even when we want to be able to do it. But there comes a point where we maybe don't have the physical stamina to be able to go to the doctor and sit there for a few hours every day. So we need to bring in a little help. These are just the signs I want you to look for. Maybe activities or social events being missed. One of the biggest reasons that people withdraw socially is because they can't hear, they can't see. Sometimes also people get uncomfortable because maybe they can't remember names anymore, and so it's not a good place. And a lot of church groups are great when they're working to the over 65 or 70 crowd, because they make you put the name tag on, which is really helpful because it takes a lot of stress out of the situation. But when those activities are being missed, it's really important to kind of say, what's going on? What's not comfortable about this? Why do you want to, why do you not join us anymore? And make it so that it's not threatening. But sometimes we don't realize that people maybe need hearing aids, or maybe they're not changing those batteries often. Maybe they haven't been to the eye doctor and we're dealing with, some cataracts or macular degeneration, or even getting new eyeglasses, because when those eyes start to shift, that becomes normal for us. We don't realize we can see it better. And a friend of mine, her grandmother went and got new glasses, and the family noticed she seemed to be struggling, and she was like, I didn't even know that I could see anymore. You kind of don't realize, because again, it becomes that normal. Maybe we visit somebody once a week or once a month, and they don't respond when we get there. This happens a lot for people who live alone. And sometimes it's memory issues, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes people believe they have memory issues when they don't. But you go visit somebody and they're just not responding to you, and sometimes maybe not even making eye contact. And you're kind of chattering away about your day, and you're kind of wondering, why are they not paying attention? Aren't they happy I'm here? Sure they are, but they haven't really realized it yet. And maybe after about 10 minutes, they start making eye contact, you'll get like a response or two, and within 20, 30 minutes, there's your old friend and you're having a conversation just like normal. And that is isolation. Because as humans, we are not meant to be alone. We need human interaction to thrive. And you don't get that interaction piece when you're just listening to the news on television or just listening to the news or, shows on the radio. We actually need that interaction. That's why assisted living communities or communities where people bring together, people that were very quiet at home sometimes just all of a sudden begin to thrive because they have all these options that they didn't have when they were at home. When your time spent with somebody is becoming to be a chore, no matter how much you want to take care of them, no matter how much you love them, but you're just a little anxious sometimes because you just want to go do what you want to do. That's when we need to get some help, because those people that know us, they know how to read our body language. They know how to read our facial expressions. They know the tone of our voice when we're happy and we're calm compared to when we're stressed and a little bit anxious. So, all right. So I didn't tell you at the beginning, I should have started with this to get your attention big. This is my favorite little pink elephant. I'm gonna talk to you about every uncomfortable thing under the stars in here so that when you walk out, you're gonna be like, oh, I'm so glad we're out of there. But if we talk about those uncomfortable things to you, my hope is that you can take one piece of this uncomfortable and bring it out and talk to your kids about it, talk to your spouse about it, talk to your best friend, your neighbor, your sister, your brother, anybody. Advanced directives. Now, if you guys have all your ducks in a row that you've taken care of with Francisco, likely you have this taken care of. If you haven't taken care of it at this point, know that when you go into a hospital, they want to know if you have a living will. And if you don't have a living will, they are going to, as long as you have your faculties about you, they're going to try and get you to fill that paperwork out while you are there. There's a great service that the Secretary of State's office provides, and you fill out all your advance directive information with them, and they send you a little card in about 6 to 8 weeks. But no matter where you travel in the country, your emergency contact information and all this information will go with you, so you're never scrambling if you get in an accident somewhere. But, so what kind of care would you like if you're no longer able to make those decisions? Your living will is going to spell out medically what you would like and what you don't want to do. Second kind of advanced directive is powers of attorney. So the financial power of attorney, the durable medical power of attorney, and mental health power of attorney. And we are the only state in the 50 states that has this mental health power of attorney. And this really comes into play if you have any kind of mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression. This can come into play if somebody has a severe stroke, and this certainly comes into play with mid to late stage Alzheimer's in certain people who struggle with behavioral issues. And if you have that mental health power of attorney in place, it just allows you to be able to put your loved one in a level 1 behavioral facility to get those medications that they may need, because maybe they have behaviors that are out of control. And if you don't have this into play, you have to petition the court for guardianship, and you're starting at a cost of about $5,000, and it can go up to, as little as, 7, 10, 12, or up to 50, 60, depending on what the situation is, who your judge is, and what the family dynamics are. So it's a really good piece, and maybe you know others who have, all their documents done in another state. It's been a long time. This kind of information should really be reviewed every couple of years, every 5 years when you're our age, and once you hit 60, 65, really every couple of years we need to look at this stuff and make sure that it's up to date.
We didn't pay her to say that.
No, they didn't. But you guys have an incredible program because you have the program that updates it yearly anyways. So I love that. That's part of the reason I like you guys. So anyways, last thing, the do not resuscitate. Does everybody know what that is? You're comfortable with understanding it, because then I don't have to really go through it. In the state of Arizona, if you want the do not resuscitate acknowledged by 911 when they walk in your home, you have to have this orange piece of paper.
You have to have the paper there?
Yes, on the refrigerator, easy to see. You want to say something?
I had a client come in And she asked me, she said, there's this square, it's an orange square. She didn't tell me it was a piece of paper. She said it's like a sticker and you put it on your refrigerator. I exhausted every website, eBay, Amazon, police station, I couldn't find it. There it is.
There you go.
That's
So-
not for sticker though.
Pardon me?
No, you just.
I've never seen it in sticker form, but maybe some of the hospitals or something
I didn't find it.
doesn't have it, but so you just, you know, we have that stuff in our living will for when we're at our hospital and our doctor knows, but at the point where our health is, you know, in a rough place or we're at an age, you know, that we don't wanna have those paddles on our chest. This only comes into play if our heart stops or our breathing stops, but if you want it respected in your home, it has to be on that orange piece of paper. I'm happy to help. Alright, talking about the uncomfortable stuff. As I mentioned before, having those conversations with your loved ones is absolutely key. We need to get it out in the open. How do you know when it's time to give up driving? Well, your dog, how's that look on
Pretty
his
good.
face?
That's wonderful.
That is the scariest question to ask anybody, because when we lose our driving, that's our independence that's threatened right there. Then what? What do we do? Luckily, here, depending on what there are many communities here that have some volunteer driving services to be able to take you places. If you're somebody who's computer savvy, you can use Uber, which is a lot less expensive than a cab, if you can get from the door to the car in 3 minutes or less, because that's a deal. But Uber is now starting a service for seniors. Yeah, and it's a little bit more comprehensive, and I don't have all the details on it yet, but we're coming along. We're coming along. But in that, let's just talk about that a little while. Before you can have that conversation with anybody, you have to have that conversation with yourself. How do I want it? Am I comfortable if my kids come to me and say, I don't think you should be driving anymore? And you're like, but I've been driving for 80 years. Precisely. But, you know, and I haven't had an accident. And we're lucky if that happens. But as humans, we're beautiful people. We adapt. So what do? We stop driving at night, right? Then we stop going on the highway. Then we kind of stay within maybe 5 to 10 miles from home. What's the last one? What do? We just make right turns so that we don't have to cross traffic. But you know, but everybody does it, and we know people that do it, and there is a beauty to doing that because we are realizing our limitations and we are adapting to keep ourselves safe. But what happens when we don't realize that we're not comfortable anymore? How do we do that? I was very blessed, our family was blessed in a very strange, awkward way, because I'll say my dad was hit by a drunk driver. But it was a very slow, you know, they had just taken off from a stop sign and he was making a left turn. So it was about 20 miles an hour, so he didn't get hurt, and it just got in the back end of the car, and he was 86, and it shook him. And about 3 weeks later, he called those of us who were living in the same city and said, I'm afraid to drive anymore, and I can't even tell you how hard that is to come out of my mouth. But there were no, you know, there were no services to do it. He said, I don't think I should be driving, but that puts a burden on all of you because we're gonna need to get to church and the grocery store and all that stuff. And luckily at the time, we had a big enough pool of people that were able to do it, but we were so grateful that we never had to have that conversation. So if there's somebody that you won't get in a car with, they shouldn't be driving. If there's somebody that you wouldn't put your grandkids in a car with, they shouldn't be driving. You know, if they're going 40 in the neighborhood and they're going 30 on Riggs Road, that's 45, that's a thing where you maybe need to have that conversation. Are you comfortable driving in these speeds? You know, and generally, if you can't have that conversation comfortably with whoever it is that your loved one is, a great place is to ask their doctor to have that conversation. You know, we have privacy issues. We sign these HIPAA forms, the Privacy Act, but we can always share information with the doctor. So even if it's your sister, you can call your sister's doctor and say, no, she's coming in, but here's what we're seeing. You know, there's 4 dents on the car. She bashed into the garage and the siding is coming off. We've got and this is what people, these are just kind of the realities. And lots of families play hide the keys, you know, they take the battery out of the car, they disconnect it, that's normal. You may think, oh my gosh, who does that? Lots of people, you know, really. So that's, you know, having that conversation. Worst case scenario, there is a report on the ADOT, Arizona Department of transportation website. It's called the Driver Behavior Condition Report. So let's say you have that neighbor that's driving 40 miles an hour on your little neighborhood street. You can fill out this form and send it in, and they will get an anonymous form from the DOT and say, hey, you know, Jackie, it's been X amount of years since you've had a driving test, you need to come in, and if you don't come in within the next 3 weeks, we'll suspend your license until you do. You know, it's a rough case, we don't usually wanna be that person, but there are options out there because nobody wants to be that person that accidentally hurts somebody or kills somebody. And sometimes even saying that to somebody can make a difference. But there are certain forms of dementia that people don't realize that they're having changes. So you can't have a rational conversation. So, having that conversation with your family, make it, I'm gonna say something you're gonna be like, really? Make it fun. It's awkward. So whatever your family thing is, if you have brunch after church on Sundays or drinks on Friday or you play tennis or you only get together a couple times a year, make it comfortable. Make it something that is, you know, how your family likes to hang out, and say, you know, I've been thinking about a couple things and I need to share. And be ready for people to say, I don't wanna talk about this. Because somebody's gonna say that, and somebody's gonna feel that way. And if they won't listen and they absolutely refuse, write it down. Write down what your wishes are so that they know. Because when push comes to shove, it becomes incredibly stressful when we get to a situation and nobody knows how to handle it because we wanna be respectful, but we don't know what to do, or I don't think they'd like that, or whatever. We need to do that. But we need to make sure that what we're saying is realistic. You know, a lot of people say, I wanna stay at home forever. I never wanna go to a community, I don't wanna go to the home. Okay, but if the next thing out of your mouth is, but I don't want any strangers in my house, well then we've got a little bit of a disconnect there, and we have to figure that out. And a huge majority of families deal with that exact disconnect. Everybody's struggling. Everybody doesn't realize that they're putting a burden somewhere else, but they're not willing to have a stranger come into their house for whatever reason. So you have to tackle that while people still have the ability to have those conversations. But whether it's driving or when you're no longer the best option, even end-of-life care, there are different rules for different states for being cremated. So the state of Illinois, and so if you have end of life all planned out, and a lot of people do, which really makes it a lot less stressful for families when people pass away, but if people don't share that they want to be cremated, in the state of Illinois, if your documents are done there, all however many children you have to agree what happens to you. In the state of Arizona right now, 2/3 of your kids have to agree what happens to you. They're working on getting that fixed, but I've talked to the funeral homes, and we've had families that have been stuck in a frozen position. Oh, that's a bad word, I wasn't saying before. Oh, that was bad. But anyways, they've been stuck until they get their families resolved of what happens. So it's just something to think about. You know, we make our families promise us, lots of people make our families promise, don't put me in the home. I don't wanna go in the home. And that's really reasonable. And we say, okay, because we want to be that person that doesn't put them in the home. But after we see okay, the next words out of our mouth need to be, I won't put you in the home as long as I have the ability and the health to take care of you safely. But when I'm no longer the best option, we need to revisit what's gonna happen, and I'm not gonna be able to have that discussion with you at that time. So you can be that person, but when we make that promise and we don't put that caveat, the guilt that swims around and that freezes people and puts them in really horrible situations is rough. 60% of caregivers die before the people that they're taking care of. And that's not age dependent, that's real. So I know I told you I was talking about a lot of doom and gloom, but so I'm giving you options to not have to do this. That's the whole point of today. So anyway, thoughts to think about. Okay, hospice. This is the last really big heavy one, I promise. There's still a lot of myth that's associated with hospice, and everybody thinks that hospice is here to help us die comfortably. And that's true, that's what they do. But really, hospice's mission is to give us the absolute best quality of life while we are still here on earth. So whatever that is for you, that's really their goal. While they do help you to pass away comfortably, their goal is to give you the best quality of life. And most people do not choose to bring in hospice until the last 2 weeks or the last 3 days, and then you don't get the benefit of hospice.
Elaine, do you define palliative care?
I will. So, to become hospice eligible, you have to have a life-limiting illness that no longer responds to typical treatment. You have a life-limiting illness that you make a decision you no longer want to treat aggressively, or the doctor says you have about 6 months to live. Now, no doctor has a crystal ball, and nobody can determine that. And we just lost a friend that had a year to live 3 days after they got that diagnosis. But we also have a client who we thought was gonna die 12 times last year. We didn't think she'd make it through the night, and she is still kicking and eating and amazing, because we don't have that crystal ball. Where that comes from is there are signs that your body shows of shutting down, and so the doctors can look at that and say, you know, the likelihood is really about 6 months. That said, sometimes people go on and off hospice for a year, 2 years, or 3 years because they up and go down. But all these people come into your life and you get attention at home like you have never seen before. And 24% of people graduate off hospice services. So if you bring them in early when you can, there are a lot of benefits that can come, and even health benefits. And people have this vision that hospice is gonna take away all their medication, and they're just, you know, if you're a diabetic, hospice is never gonna take away your insulin. They're just, you stop treating your COPD, or you stop treating your cancer, or your congestive heart failure, treating them aggressively, but they're not gonna rip away the things that are gonna kill you. Most people stay on a fair amount of medications when they're on hospice. It's just kinda good to know. And hospice is a Medicare benefit. So all the services that come with it, the beds and the products like the pull-ups and the creams and the bedside tables and the things to make your life easier, oxygen, even your medications, the ones that are related to your illness, those are all part of your hospice benefit, so you're not paying for that out of pocket anymore. That's coming out of your Medicare hospice benefit. One of the things that people don't know about hospice is that you get to choose what hospice you want. And in Phoenix, there's, Greater Phoenix, there's over 80. One of the handouts that I gave you is a list of all kinds of resources. And many of them have names and numbers and websites. But the ones that have a lot of options, it says, please call our office. So if you call me and you give me a situation, and you tell me what's important to your family, I'll give you 3, 4, or 5 hospices that are a good fit for what you're telling me, and then you can interview them and know that this is who I want, because their philosophy. They all do the same thing legally and medically, but sometimes the philosophy, well, often times, the philosophies are just a little bit different, and kind of the way they provide the care speaks to you and your family differently. And if you ever have a bad hospice experience, tell them, so that they might not know that something's going wrong. They might be having a glitch in their system too, but if they don't step up and do it how you want it after you've told them, you can switch hospices like that. We just bring a new one in, they have the uncomfortable conversation and do all the transition, and you never have to even deal with that nightmare. So that's good to know. One of the things that hospice provides now is something called palliative care. And not all hospices do it. And every program is just a little bit different. But palliative care basically is symptom management. So you still have to have some kind of a condition, some kind of a chronic condition, but you can still be treating cancer or whatever it is. But you've kind of got a barrier to getting out, and the palliative is just, it's symptom management. So what palliative care does in most all cases, and this is the one thread that's pretty consistent, is that it gives you 24/7 telephone access to a triage nurse. It also gives you a once-a-month nurse visit, and it's a really great way to bridge what's going on at the doctor's office to your home, because you go to the doctor and you present who you want to be to them, and then the reality at home might not be exactly what you're presenting, and that's normal, we all do that. But if you need to make a change in medication, if you get if you get an infection, if you get something, the light just went out. If you get something that, is, struggling, that nurse can then come in and facilitate getting that dealt with so much quicker than, waiting until Monday morning. Cause when stuff happens, right, it always happens after 5 on Friday. That's just Murphy talking to us. So, does that cover what you needed?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. One of the things that I find really crucial for people is getting somebody to go to the doctor with you. Because when we go to the doctor, especially if we're a little bit sick, if we don't hear so well, if we're struggling with anything, we don't remember what happens. So a couple years ago, my mother-in-law, who's bright and active and very engaged, 72, I called her and the pain in her voice was so palpable. And I said, "What is wrong?" And she said, "I have to go to physical therapy, my shoulder is terrible." I said, "What's wrong with it?" She said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, should you talk to the doctor?" She said, "I just got back from the doctor." And I said, "Well, what did he say?" She said, "I don't know, it made sense while I was doing it, so I didn't think I needed to write it down, and now I can't tell you, you know." But that happens to all of us. And when we're in pain, we can't process, we can't remember, we can't do that. So I suggest people who are alone, bring that health buddy and be that person. You be their health buddy and they're yours. So that you make that list before you go to the doctor. So somebody's there writing down those answers and helping you to do, and remember and talk about the things that you want to do. HIPAA paperwork updates are critical. HIPAA is the new Privacy Act. It's the Health Insurance Privacy and Portability Act. And that allows your doctors to talk to one another. And that allows the medical field to know who in your family they can talk to. And most of us just put our spouses. But if we always travel with our spouses, and we get in a car accident, then who do they talk to? We need backups. We need backups for that kind of thing. If we just have one child, or do we have more than one child? Or maybe our best friend is the person who kind of knows what's going on, aside from the fact that our daughter is our power of attorney. But get those names on there so that if something happens, everybody knows who the go-to information, who those people are. So if we have to make changes, least expensive is home modifications. And one of the handouts out there is a home safety checklist. And I encourage you to go through your house, because the littlest details can make the biggest differences. Light bulbs. As we get older, we don't see so well in bright light, or dim light, excuse me. And that's how people fall down, like on stairs, they don't see the differences. So getting bright lights in our lamps, in our front entranceway, in our back entranceway, and another light in our garage, because that light that the garage door opener is very dim. And we have gotten so many clients from people who fall on that little step in the garage. So what I suggest to people is sweep that off, wipe it off, and get a big bright piece of orange painter's tape and put it on there so you see where that step is, so that you can define that step. But in our hallways, sometimes we end up stacking up the newspapers or the magazines. And okay, that's fine, that's normal, but let's get them out of the way so that if the dog wags his tail, it doesn't become a hazard for us. Looking at those kinds of things, grab bars in our bathrooms, non-skid surfaces. Towel bars are not meant to be handlebars. We need to have the real grab bars and not the suction cup ones. There's even a service for under $100. They will coat your bathtub and they'll coat your shower so that you literally can't slip when it's wet. They'll do whole saltillo floors if they need to, but it just puts us in a better place. Bringing services in would be next guess on the level of cost. When you bring services in, you can get what you want, when you want, and how you want it. And there's home care companies that will come into your home. Home care companies support you to stay independent at home. They do companionship, they take you to the doctor, we do housekeeping, preparing meals, grocery shopping, take you to the doctor, change the sheets on the bed, help you shower, personal care. Home care supports hospice, they support home health. But there are also doctors that will come to your home, and eyeglass people, and dentists, even hairdressers, so that if you can't get out, there are people that can come in. And the medical things, many of them are supported by Medicare. Certainly not dental stuff, because that's not covered for medications, but anyways. And then if we're going to communities, that is when I suggest you talk to a placement person. So there are people, and it's no cost to you, they get paid by the community. I work with about 4 of them that I've worked with for a long time and I know and trust. But they will sit down and listen to you and what your budget is and what's important to you. Do you wanna be close to your friends? Do you wanna be close to your neighbors? Do you wanna go to independent? Are you ready for assisted? Is it memory? They kinda help you assess what is the right move. Cause typically, people move to independent living when they need assisted, they move to assisted living when they need memory. So because as, back to that humanism of being human, we're sort of in denial sometimes about what the realities are of what we can and can't do. But you can stay in the same apartment as an independent person, get assisting services, and oftentimes get memory services. There's a lot of options out there. But if your cash flow can't do that, there are group homes that specialize in certain levels of care, and they look like homes just like any of our neighborhoods. And there's 2,800 of them in Maricopa County. So these placement agencies know the ones that are good and the ones that are a fit. And they can help you, facilitate that. Help, I've fallen and I can't get up. And it's kind of funny, and Saturday Night Live made that really funny. Except when it's real. It's not good. So anybody who's alone really needs to have that bracelet. You need to have that little medical alert button. We did our last newsletter on some of the different ones. The most common ones that our clients use are the Medical Guardian, which is Florence Henderson, ADT or Lifeline, or that one from Walmart, the Great Call 5-star. But anybody who has somebody in their life with dementia, and they're living with dementia, their spouse, the person that's the caregiver of that spouse needs that button, because the person with dementia may not be able to call 911 even though there's somebody in that house. So I talked a little bit about this, the non-medical home care, kind of what agencies like ours do, but I just want to share, because sometimes we get this umbrella called home health. Medical home care is covered by insurance when you have a doctor's order. And that's like that follow-up to the hospitalization, the procedures, the surgeries, med management, wound care, physical therapy, occupational. Non-medical home care is private pay, long-term care insurance, veterans aid and attendance, or the Arizona long-term care system, which is Medicaid. So, just a brief, quick piece there. The stuff that I'm talking about is hard, and it's awkward, and it's emotional, because we have to have that little, we have to have that conversation with ourselves, that little reality piece. What is certain? Death and taxes. But if we can prepare for how we want to age out. We get to do that. And when we get to, when we make that choice, when we make the choice, we have options. If we don't deal with it, we don't have the same kind of options. And most people tend to like options. I like your attitude, Harris. When we're in really bad spots, what really gets us through? We kind of make up that mind that we're going to put on those big girl pants and those big boy pants and kind of tackle it. And when we do something with a positive attitude, it's easier, it's faster, it's less stressful, but we have to get to that point. But we have to remember that we have a choice when we get in the morning to be positive. We get to remember that we always have choices if we choose to use them. What fits into your busy schedule better, exercising an hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? Sometimes we just need that mirror in front of our face. We need that little bit of a clunk on our head to kind of get us off our tushes and say, okay, I really need to deal with this. Physical therapy. I would say half the people in the world hate physical therapy because it hurts and it's hard. But that's why it gets us better. And if we do the physical therapy, it works. So this is probably my favorite of all the cartoons. But luckily, we've got all kinds of help and all kinds of solutions. And that stapled page, that is the resource list out there. If you only take one piece of paper home, take that home. Because this kind of goes through all the different services that are available to us here in Phoenix. So that was some of the transition. Yeah, that's cool. We are so blessed to live in a community that have so many options. But people don't even realize a lot of the things that are out there. Meals on Wheels, somebody that can't cook anymore. Now, Sun Lakes does not have that as an option, and that's why Neighbors Who Care has a meal provision service. Most areas of Maricopa County do have Meals on Wheels, and if you can afford them, then pretty much anybody can get them. If you can't afford them, then the Area Agency on Aging will send a social worker and determine, and then you can get those subsidized. But there's adult daycare for people who are struggling with dementia. Respite care services, even within communities, if families wanna go away and they don't wanna leave somebody alone, it's a lot cheaper for a week to send mom or grandma to an assisted living for a week than to bring in 24/7 home care. But people don't realize that communities offer these kinds of services. Geriatric care managers can help you if there is nobody. I talked earlier about care managing the people that don't have anybody close or don't have anybody at all. Geriatric care managers help them manage all those decisions and what to do with their health care and how to pay for things, and they'll bring in a team so that there's a lawyer and a financial person, and everybody, there's a little triangle of eyes on somebody so nobody takes advantage. Even caregiving coaches, sometimes families really struggle about what happened with parents. Now with our technology, people can have meetings, in 5 different states and 3 different countries, and you're all in the same room on a screen. There are incontinence products also on that list that are the best incontinence products in the world, I'm just saying it. They're called Tranquilly, but they don't leak and they don't smell, and they bring dignity to people who are still very active and have issues with dribbling or whatever that is. That's all real, so you have to be able to talk about that comfortably. Veterans benefits. People that have served during active wartime, veterans can get up to $1,900 a month to support assisted living services in the home or outside of the home. Spouses up to $1,400. You do have to put your assets in an irrevocable trust, but there are ways to get money. Elder law attorneys, even just naturopathic doctors, people don't even know, like shingles can be cured with acupuncture.